Take off that apron. In this house, you're the help, not the daughter." The words came out of my mother's mouth like a slap that echoed across the kitchen. 25 faces turned toward me, some pretending to sip wine, others pretending not to hear. Christmas Eve, 5:58 p.m., Naperville, Illinois. Snow pressed against the window, the turkey smoked in the oven, and my sister Maddie lounged on the couch scrolling through her phone. "You're just the maid," she said, her lips curved in that confident little smile she'd inherited from Mom. "Add 2 more dishes for my friends." My father Peter avoided my eyes, pretending to check the thermostat. No one said a word. I stood there, a dish towel in one hand, soap burning my cracked knuckles. The kitchen light hummed. I looked at my reflection in the oven door and saw a woman who had spent 3 years paying every bill in this house. Utilities, internet, groceries, because you're better with money, honey. My savings sat at $120,000. I worked 2 jobs, balanced spreadsheets by day, washed pans by night. They never noticed. They thought order was natural like gravity. Mom grabbed the small envelope I'd placed on the counter, tore it open, and saw a store coupon I'd used to buy her a candle. She laughed. "You always give such cheap things. No wonder you're still single." Laughter rippled through the room. I felt something inside me shift, not break. Breaks make noise. This was silent, deliberate. Maddie airdropped a to-do list to my phone. Refill drinks, serve dessert, wipe counters. Her friends giggled, one whispering, "Maid Aaron." I turned off the faucet, the running water hissing like a fuse. The room smelled of butter and garlic, the kind of warmth that should mean love, but here only meant labor. My hands had small cuts from scrubbing pots since morning. I wondered if they would even notice if I disappeared. Carol, my mother, would probably ask who would pay the internet bill. She moved to the fridge, humming, rearranging food as if she hadn't planned this show for weeks. "Don't look so dramatic," she said without turning around. "It's not like you're doing anything important." My chest tightened. I had believed for so long that love could be earned by keeping quiet, by working harder, by making everyone else's life easier. But love built on utility is just dependence wearing perfume. I picked up my phone. The airdrop still blinked Maddie's list. I deleted it. I opened my banking app. The numbers stared back, $120.47.56. Years of saying yes, years of covering short months, years of swallowing humiliation and calling it family. I walked to the living room. The guests laughed around the fireplace. I smiled, not because I was calm, but because calm was the only armor I had left. Mr. Patel, our neighbor, caught my eye. He had always said I was the steady one. I think he knew in that moment something was ending. I excused myself, quietly climbed the stairs, and closed the bedroom door. The sound of the party faded behind it. The walls seemed to exhale. I sat on the edge of my bed, laptop open. The glow from the screen lit my face in the mirror. My fingers moved without hesitation. Transfer $120,000 to Hyesa account. Confirm. Cancel all auto payments, electricity, gas, water, internet. Revoke shared access. A quiet satisfaction filled the room, not joy, not anger, clarity. For the first time, I realized silence could have teeth. I scanned the last grocery receipt, $428, and saved it in a folder labeled Receipts, Christmas. Then I took a photo of the gas meter, the water meter, the breaker panel, evidence of ownership, evidence of burden. I looked at the empty binder sitting on my desk, the one Mom once said was for recipes. I placed the photos inside, not recipes, records. The smell of cinnamon drifted in from the hall. I heard laughter again, a cork popping, the clinking of glasses. I remembered when those sounds used to mean home. Now they were just noise over the hum of a life I had built for them and never for myself. I closed the laptop and whispered to the empty room. They call me the maid. Tonight the house will answer. The clock read 6:12. The transfer cleared. Somewhere downstairs the lights flickered once unnoticed. I stood, hung the apron on the door, and took one last look at the binder. It was blank now, but by morning it would hold the story of everything they'd taken for granted. I brushed a smear of flour off my sleeve and smiled, not the soft smile they were used to, but something sharper, quieter, the kind that promises consequence. Outside, the snow kept falling steady and unbothered. The day before Christmas felt like a rerun of the same quiet exhaustion that had followed me for years, except now I was counting days instead of hopes. Naperville was wrapped in gray light, the kind that makes parking lots look endless, and I stood in the checkout line at Mariano's holding a half-price bouquet and a grocery bill longer than my arm, most of it for their dinner, not mine. The cashier smiled and asked if I was hosting, and I almost laughed because I was not the host, I was the invisible machinery that kept the lights on. 3 years earlier, after Dad lost a contract and Mom's credit card hit its limit, I had offered to put the house utilities under my name so the accounts wouldn't close. She had said it would help my credit score. It did for a while, until every month I watched the autopay drain my account before I even saw my own paycheck. I told myself it was temporary, that family meant filling the gaps. By winter 2022, the Gap had a name $600 for their heating bill that December, when pipes almost froze. I paid it quietly, afraid of what the cold would do to them, afraid of the guilt if I didn't. That was the first rescue, the one that taught them I would always come through. The next came in spring when Mom ordered catering for her church brunch, and the charge appeared on my credit card. $520 labeled Blake Residence. When I called, she said it was a mix-up, she would pay me back. She never did. I learned to watch the statement like a guard at a gate. By 2023, Maddie started sending me links with comments like, "Can you order this with your card and I'll Venmo you later?" Later never came. There was always a reason, a trip, a bill, a memory of some kindness I owed her. I worked from my small studio apartment 15 minutes away, a single room filled with receipts and the steady hum of my laptop. My job title sounded serious assistant controller for a local logistics firm, but my life was measured in unpaid favors. When I came home at night, I logged into my online banking before bed and checked if another auto draft had gone out. The numbers never stopped moving like a faucet left running. $7,860 in 24 months. I could have taken a trip to Italy with that or paid down my student loan, but instead it had become their comfort fund, invisible, unacknowledged. I tried to convince myself it was peacekeeping, not servitude. Every family has someone who keeps things from falling apart. The problem is that they forget the keeper is human. Mom liked to call me the reliable one, a compliment that always sounded like a chain. Maddie was the charming one, loud, spontaneous, always forgiven. I was the quiet accountant of their chaos, the one who cleaned the mess behind her glittering nights. She crashed Dad's car in 2021, and I was the one who negotiated the insurance claim. She overdrew her debit card buying Christmas gifts, and I transferred $200 to cover the fee. They used to joke that I was the sensible one, the steady hand, the built-in safety net. I smiled through it because arguing only made me sound ungrateful. That morning, standing in the grocery store, I watched the total climb to $428, half of which would feed people who barely remembered to thank me. I paid anyway. On the drive back, the snow began again, soft at first, then heavier, and I realized I was driving through the same route I had taken every year, the same errands, the same exhaustion. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Don't forget to pick up extra napkins, we're out." I glanced at the car dashboard, the temperature blinking low, and I laughed under my breath because somehow even the weather felt like part of the debt. When I reached home, I dropped the groceries on the counter, arranged the receipt neatly under a magnet labeled Family First, and stared at the total again. My pulse slowed. The weight of it all was measurable now. That night, I made myself dinner in the studio, pasta with butter and salt, nothing fancy, just something that belonged only to me. I sat by the window and thought of every rescue like beads on a string. The first bill, the catering, the forgotten Venmo, the endless calls for just a small favor. I opened my laptop to sort digital folders for the holidays and found one labeled Household Accounts. Inside were scans of every bill I had ever paid for them. I scrolled my cursor trembling and saw the pattern for the first time every month on time, every name mine. My name. I deleted the shared link that allowed Mom to view the accounts. It was such a small click, but it felt like air filling my lungs after years underwater. Then I logged into Amazon, saw the shared family profile with Maddie's smiling face, and removed her access. She had used it for streaming shopping, even a birthday gift last year that she claimed was from her paycheck. I removed her. Then I opened Netflix, saw 4 profiles, all of them active. I canceled the subscription. The confirmation email arrived instantly, quiet and final. I stared at it, the same calm, settling in that I had felt when the lights flickered after my transfer. They would notice later, maybe tomorrow night, when they tried to watch their favorite show and saw the message "payment declined." It was a small revenge, almost polite, but it tasted like oxygen. The next morning, while checking emails before work, I saw one that made my breath stop. Credit application confirmation, it read. The sender was an internet provider. It listed my name, my social security number, and the address of the house. Carol Blake had applied for a premium plan under my information. I scrolled numb and saw the line signature on file. She had forged it. I closed the laptop slowly, like if I moved too fast, the whole thing would shatter. There it was, the truth in digital ink. This wasn't carelessness anymore. It was entitlement carved into paperwork. I felt the anger settle into focus, clean and sharp. I made a copy of the email and filed it under proof. I didn't confront her, not yet. Let her think everything still worked. I wanted her to feel the switch when it flipped. That night, I folded the grocery receipt again and placed it next to the binder labeled recipes. I added a sticky note utilities summary, unpaid. I stared at it until the ink bled slightly into the paper. My phone buzzed again with a new text from Mom. Make sure the oven is preheated before we get home. I typed back, of course, and smiled. In the reflection of my screen, I saw the faint outline of the woman I was becoming, patient, precise, waiting for her moment. The morning of December 24th began with the smell of cinnamon rolls and correction, because nothing in that house happened without my mother narrating it. Carol Blake stood in the kitchen wearing pearls and command her voice carrying through the hall as 3 of her friends from church sipped coffee at the counter. In this house, she said brightly, Erin handles the kitchen. She's good with her hands, not much else. The laughter that followed was soft and poisonous, the kind that coats cruelty with politeness. I was standing near the sink, scraping a pan, and the words slid into my back like ice water. One of the women said, "Oh, how lucky you are to have help during the holidays." And Mom smiled. "She's family, but you know what I mean." I wiped my hands, pretending the heat of the dishwater could hide the sting in my chest. Maddie walked in wearing pajamas that cost more than my entire outfit, holding her phone like a scepter. "Mom's right," she said, glancing at me. "Erin doesn't mind. She likes keeping busy. Don't overreact." Then she turned to her friends and added with a smirk, "She's basically the help anyway." They laughed again. Mr. Patel's voice came from the doorway, polite but heavy. "Morning, Erin." He had come to drop off a card, his eyes flicking between me and them. He heard every word. I nodded, forcing a smile, but something inside me locked into place. I felt it settle like a switch, waiting to be flipped. Carol carried on, oblivious, pouring more coffee and announcing her plans for the afternoon. "We're thinking of starting the renovation. Next year," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "We'll finally upgrade the kitchen. Erin will co-sign. She's been so helpful with our finances." The air in the room thinned. I turned toward her slowly. "I didn't agree to that," I said quietly. She waved a hand as if swatting a fly. "Oh, don't be dramatic. The bank just needs your name, dear. It's only paperwork." The women nodded approvingly, one murmuring something about family trust. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I saw the email subject line, "Action required HELOC application. Co-signer verification." My breath caught. They had done it. They had actually tried to attach my name to their home equity loan. I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. The sender was the same bank where my checking account lived. The betrayal had a logo now. I took a slow step back, my hands still damp. Maddie noticed and rolled her eyes. Here we go. Erin and her feelings again. Carol gave a small theatrical sigh. She takes everything so personally. It's just business, sweetheart. You of all people should understand numbers. I felt the laughter from the guests, muffled but sharp, like the sound of glass being swept into a dustpan. My pulse drummed in my ears. Mr. Patel shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It's good to see a close family," he said quietly, then left, closing the door with more force than politeness allowed. No one noticed. Mom was already telling her friends how she'd use the loan to redo the floors and add a sunroom. I stood there in silence, the email glowing on my phone, and something in me began to harden. I didn't shout, didn't cry. I walked to the kitchen island, picked up the used coffee cups, and stacked them with perfect calm. Inside that calm was calculation. As I rinsed the cups, I remembered the shared shopping list on our iPhones, the one that let Maddie add things for me to buy. I opened my phone settings, family sharing removed her. A small digital sound confirmed it. I moved to the next garage access. Carol had insisted I install an app that let her open my apartment garage when she needed to borrow things. I scrolled, toggled off access, and hit save. Each tap felt like reclaiming inches of air. I could hear their conversation behind me about countertops and fixtures, my name woven into it like currency. Carol turned to her friends again. "Erin will help us with the financing. She's always responsible." I looked up. "No," I said simply, almost whispering. The table went quiet. One of the women chuckled nervously, trying to soften it. "Oh dear, she's joking." Carol laughed too. "Of course she is. She knows she's part of this family project." My phone buzzed again with another email from the bank co-signer, verification pending. I swiped left and archived it. I didn't owe them an answer. I owed myself silence. I dried my hands and started arranging plates on the table, every motion deliberate. Maddie hovered nearby, whispering, "You really shouldn't embarrass Mom like that." Her tone was sugar-coated, but her eyes dared me to make a scene. I smiled instead, steady and unbothered. "You're right," I said softly. "Embarrassment doesn't suit her." I turned back to the counter. The room fell into an uneasy hush. The women exchanged glances, sensing something had shifted, but not yet understanding what. Carol tried to regain control. "Erin's just tired." "She's been working too much," she said with forced cheer. "Anyway, once the renovation is done, she can finally relax, knowing she helped us build a legacy." The word legacy tasted like metal in my mouth. Legacy for who? I looked at the reflection of the room in the microwave door, the pearls, the coffee cups, my own hands trembling slightly but steadying with every breath. Legacy for the ones who never lifted a finger, who mocked the person paying the bills. I could feel a strange calm rising again, the same kind that had guided me the night before. When the guests finally left, Mom cornered me near the sink. "Don't make me look foolish," she hissed, her voice low but sharp. "You're going to sign that form." I met her eyes and smiled faintly. "You already did, didn't you?" Her lips parted just enough to confirm what I already knew. I took the dish towel, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. "Then you don't need me." I walked past her through the hallway lined with family photos, each frame perfectly straight, each smile rehearsed. Upstairs in the guest room, my phone vibrated with another notification, Maddie's message, "Don't ruin Christmas with your drama." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, quiet and deliberate, the world whitening itself clean. I stood by the window, watching the flakes collect on the driveway, the same driveway I had shoveled last year when Dad's back went out, the same one I paid to repair when the concrete cracked. I thought about all the small rescues they had forgotten and realized this morning wasn't a humiliation, it was documentation. Proof of pattern. I would keep everything. Receipts, emails, texts. I would give them their renovation, but not in the way they imagined. My reflection in the glass looked steady, now colder, almost detached. Behind me, I could still hear Carol's laughter echoing faintly downstairs, oblivious to the quiet dismantling already underway. By noon, the house felt swollen with noise pans, clanging laughter echoing too loudly for what it meant. Carol's friends had left, but their words still hung in the air like perfume gone sour. I tied my hair back, slipped my phone into my pocket, and told myself to survive one more errand before the evening. The grocery list was long again, not because we needed more food, but because Maddie had invited extra people and insisted everything be perfect. "You don't have to pay," she said with her usual false kindness. "Just bring your card in case." I smiled, knowing she had no idea that my card was no longer her safety net. At the checkout line, she piled bottles of wine and desserts onto the conveyor belt, chatting with the cashier like a celebrity in a small town. When the total appeared, she handed over the shiny secondary card I had once given her back, when I still believed generosity could fix loyalty. The cashier swiped, paused, and tried again. The screen flashed red, declined. Maddie blinked, then laughed too loudly. "Oh, that's weird. Can you try again?" The cashier did still decline. People in line began to look impatient. I stepped forward, watching the color rise in her cheeks. "Maybe use yours," I said softly. She hesitated, fumbling in her bag, finally pulling out her own card, the one she claimed was for emergencies only. It worked. The receipt printed with a soft whine, and she yanked it from the machine. Outside, she hissed, "You could have warned me." I kept walking, the cold air biting at my face. "I didn't know you planned to use it," I said calmly. She glared. "You always have to make me look stupid." I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the loudest form of truth. On the drive back, she texted Mom, and within minutes, my phone buzzed with a message from Carol Charge. "The wine to your account. Maddie will pay you back later." I stared at the screen, the letters blurring, then typed a single word. No, I didn't hit send. I deleted it instead. The power of refusal was in the doing, not the declaration. At home, the kitchen was a battlefield of half-prepared dishes. Carol was stirring something at the stove, pretending to be busy. "Did you get everything she asked without turning around?" "Most of it," I replied, setting the bags down. She looked over her shoulder, a tight smile. "Good." I ordered special wine. "It's $180. Just put it on your card. I'll Venmo you." She said it like she was talking to a service worker, her tone light transactional. "I'll pass," I said, opening the fridge. She frowned. "What do you mean, pass?" "It's not my expense," I said evenly. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't start this again." "Erin, you always make things complicated." I smiled, a small private thing she didn't deserve to see. "You'll figure it out." I closed the fridge door slowly and walked away. In the living room, Maddie was on her phone posting a story of herself arranging centerpieces. #family time, she said aloud, not to me, but to her invisible audience. I felt the absurdity of it all, the performance, the false glow. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, pulled out my phone, and opened the home Wi-Fi settings. I changed the password and renamed the network to Not the Maid. I laughed quietly, not out of pettiness, but clarity. Only Evan next door would see it, the retired engineer, who always joked about how my house's signal reached his porch. It was a secret code for anyone observant enough to understand. Downstairs, I could hear Maddie yelling about the slow internet. I pictured her tapping her phone repeatedly, thinking it was the router's fault. I stretched out on the bed, feeling lighter than I had in months. That evening, the sun dipped low, spilling orange light through the kitchen window. Carol was pacing phone to her ear. "I don't know what's wrong. The bank says the payment source failed," she said. I paused at the doorway. "For what?" She covered the receiver with her hand. "The catering, just a small deposit, don't make that face." I didn't move. "How much?" $560, she said quickly. "We'll pay you back." I tilted my head. "Did you use my card again?" Her mouth opened, closed. "You gave us permission before, remember?" I smiled faintly. "I remember canceling that card 2 weeks ago." Her eyes flickered. The catering company must have realized the truth at the same time because her phone chimed with an email notification. She opened it, and her expression shifted from irritation to disbelief. "It says the order was canceled," she murmured. I waited. They said the payment source was deactivated. I met her gaze. "Then it's not my problem." She stared at me, searching for the old version of me, the one who would apologize and fix it. She didn't find her. I turned to the counter and began unpacking the groceries we did have, methodical, unhurried. "What are we supposed to do now?" she asked. "Cook," I said simply. I could feel the silence behind me stretch thin. Maddie appeared in the doorway holding her phone. "The Wi-Fi's down," she announced as if it were an emergency. "Restart the router," I said, not looking up. "What's the password?" she asked. "You'll figure it out," I replied, echoing her mother's own words back to her. The quiet satisfaction was subtle but deep, a ripple under the surface of restraint. Carol muttered something about ungrateful daughters, but I didn't answer. Instead, I checked my banking app again, reviewing each shared payment profile. The old family wallet was still there, linked to Carol's Amazon and Maddie's Uber Eats. I froze the account confirmed and deleted all linked users. Clean. When I finished, I looked around the kitchen. Every sound seemed sharper now, the clatter of utensils, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint echo of my own heartbeat. I realized that I wasn't angry anymore, just awake. I watched the digital clock on the stove blink 12:12, and it felt like a countdown not to destruction but to balance. Upstairs, I heard Maddie shouting for Mom, her voice high and frustrated, followed by Carol snapping back. The house was unraveling in small, invisible ways, and I didn't need to lift a finger. I leaned against the counter, breathing in the faint scent of cinnamon from the rolls she had baked that morning. They were cooling on the rack, untouched, a symbol of all her performative perfection. I picked one up, tore a piece, and smiled. For the first time, it actually tasted sweet. By late afternoon, the house began to fill again, voices overlapping, coats piling on chairs, the smell of wine and roasted vegetables seeping into every corner like a performance about to start. Carol moved through the crowd with her glass lifted and her confidence rehearsed, greeting guests as if she owned not just the house, but everyone in it. I stood by the counter, half invisible, arranging napkins and silverware. When she spotted me, she smiled wide and called out loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "Our Erin is such a blessing. She's our Christmas maid tonight." The laughter came like a ripple, polite but real, and I felt it wash over me cold and sticky. A woman I barely knew chuckled and said, "You raised her well, Carol, so helpful." My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did. Maddie smirked from across the table, raising her glass in mock salute. To Erin, she said, "the family MVP." I caught her tone, the sarcasm too sharp to miss. I smiled back faintly, lifted the carving knife, and sliced through the half-cooked turkey on the counter, each motion calm, precise. They thought humiliation was control, but I was already collecting receipts. Every airdrop message, every text, every whispered command had been saved in the hidden folder of my phone. I lifted it casually, pretending to check the timer, and snapped quick screenshots of the ongoing group chat, where Maddie and her friend laughed about me being the house intern. The evidence was piling up faster than the dishes in the sink. Carol walked over with her clipboard, a relic of her perfectionism, and whispered, "Make sure the gravy doesn't burn Erin, and keep the kitchen door closed when guests arrive." I nodded the same way a professional might when humoring a client. The turkey timer beeped. The oven light flickered, and I saw the digital order confirmation taped to the fridge, the catering turkey Maddie had placed last year using my online profile. I remembered how she bragged about it, claiming she handled all the food while the payment quietly hit my account. I pulled out my phone, logged into the store's site, and checked the scheduled delivery, still linked to my old login. I clicked cancel, confirmed, and smiled. A small digital win unnoticed by anyone but me. The real turkey sat half-cooked on the counter, the skin pale and unfinished. I turned the oven down and let the smell of raw seasoning drift into the air, subtle, but enough to ruin their timing. In the living room, the guests were laughing too loudly now, voices clashing with Carol's from the speakers. Carol poured more wine, glancing back at me every few minutes like a general inspecting her soldier. She didn't see the quiet unraveling already in motion. My phone buzzed again, this time from the bank. The message was simple. HISA account funded successfully. ACH transfer confirmed instant. I exhaled slowly, a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the oven heat. My money was safe, my autonomy intact. Carol wouldn't know until much later when the bills stopped paying themselves. She was still bragging about her supposed renovation plan, telling an aunt about how Erin will help with the paperwork because she's so good with numbers. The aunt smiled approvingly, murmuring about family teamwork. I stood at the sink, rinsing a glass, watching the reflection of Carol's lips moving as she built her illusion. Every lie she told made my silence stronger. A few minutes later, she came into the kitchen, holding a thick folder. The edges dog-eared her voice, dropping to the tone she used when she wanted compliance disguised as reason. "Erin, can we go over something quickly?" she said. "It's just a formality, nothing serious." She laid out a sheet of paper on the counter. My name was printed neatly at the top. "This is to extend the utility account another 12 months. It's easier if it stays under your name since you already handle the auto pay." Her tone was soft coaxing, as if she were asking me to pass the salt. "Just sign at the bottom, it'll take 2 seconds. I dried my hands on a towel and looked at the paper. The line waiting for my signature glared back like a wound. "You could also call the company and put it in your name," I said lightly. She laughed too quickly. "Oh, don't make this complicated, honey. You know how long those calls take. I'll fix it next year. We'll pay you back." I stared at her, then at the guests behind her, laughing around the table, the ornaments glinting under the chandelier. "No," I said quietly. She blinked, smile faltering. "Excuse me." I repeated it slower. "No, I'm not signing that." Her face changed in small, sharp ways, eyes narrowing, chin tightening, a flicker of panic smoothed over with anger. "Why are you being difficult, Erin? It's Christmas Eve." "Because this isn't my bill," I said. "It's your house. You'll need your own name on it." The air between us thinned. The kitchen noise dimmed as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. For the first time, I saw her discomfort clearly stripped of confidence. She set her glass down hard enough to clink. "You're acting like a stranger," she snapped. "After all I've done for you." I almost laughed. "After all I've done for you, the mantra of every person who takes more than they give." "Dinner's getting cold," I said, stepping aside. She glared but said nothing. I picked up my phone, walked to the hallway, and typed a note under my saved folder. December 24th, 5:42 p.m. Refused to sign utility extension. Witnesses present. I didn't know why I wrote it like a report, maybe because documentation had become my quiet form of justice. Back in the kitchen, the guests were seated murmuring as the first plates went around. Carol forced a bright smile, her voice loud again, saying something about how families always have little disagreements before holidays. Maddie looked at me from across the room, suspicion in her eyes, but I didn't return the glance. I poured myself a small glass of water, raised it to my lips, and took a slow drink. It tasted like calm. Upstairs, my phone buzzed again with another confirmation from the bank, a duplicate transfer verification. I turned off the sound and let the screen go dark. The rest of the house hummed in ignorance, unaware that their foundation was no longer supported by my name. I went back to the oven, checked the turkey, and closed the door. It would never be ready in time. Carol's laughter filled the dining room, again louder than ever, and I let it echo against the quiet certainty growing inside me. The night wasn't over yet, but the story of their control was already ending. The clock on the stove blinked 5:20, and the house was full enough to feel like a stage chair scraping glassware, chiming the kind of holiday noise that makes strangers sound like family, and family sound like strangers. And I stood by the counter, drying a pan, when Carol lifted her chin and said it loud enough to score the moment you are just the maid, not the daughter. The laughter rolled like a low tide through the dining room and stopped at my feet. I looked down and saw my hands, small cuts along the knuckles from a morning of scouring pink raw lines that told a longer story than anything printed on the holiday invitations, and a clean thought slid into place. I am not a free ecosystem. I am not the silent plumbing that carries everyone else's comfort. I am not a faucet they can turn without asking. I breathed once slow, and the sting cooled into clarity. Peter avoided my eyes. Maddie lifted her phone to capture another cheerful clip for her followers. The guests smiled with the practiced ease of people who prefer a good scene to a true one. And I felt the room tilt not toward anger, but toward record-keeping, toward the private ledger I had been building for 3 years, toward the line where I would write, paid in full, but not by me anymore. I set the pan down and pressed my thumb against one cracked knuckle. A small pressure, a promise to myself. Then I wiped the counter and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, a steady tone under the voices, the sound of my name paying for their warmth. A woman I did not know reached for a second helping and said how wonderful it must be for me to practice my cozy traditions. I smiled and said nothing, because the only tradition I was practicing now was refusal in its cleanest form, and it was about to become visible. The turkey was behind schedule, the gravy was on the edge of burning, and still Carol held court about her renovation plans, how the sunroom would face the maples, and how the counters would finally suit a real cook. How Erin will handle the paperwork, because she is so good with numbers. She said the last part like a compliment dipped in demand, and a few people clapped their forks against their plates. Like that was the kind of toast a mother should give. I checked my phone and saw the transfer confirmation again. $120,000 to Hyasa Done and Safe AutoPay for electricity, gas, water. Internet canceled. Shared vault access. Revoked each line a door that had closed softly behind me. And I opened the thermostat app and saw our home listed under my account with 3 shared users, nested beneath. I toggled their access off-left myself as owner, watched the icons gray out one by one, a small digital snowfall on my screen, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The action so quiet it made my heartbeat sound loud. The heat kicked once through the vents, then settled the sort of lull only a person who listens for it would notice, and I thought of the internship I had earned in Chicago last year, a place that would have taught me more than any of these rooms ever had. And I remembered how Carol called the night before I planned to sign the paperwork. She said the house needs you, the utilities roll over tomorrow, be a good daughter, and keep them under your name for 1 more year. She said family first, and I said yes because I had been taught that yes was the only door to peace. Then the email came from the firm saying they needed someone who could start immediately, and I told them I would be staying closer to home for family reasons, and I closed my laptop and folded laundry and tried not to cry into the clean towels. The memory rose now like a slide projected against the opposite wall, and I watched it the way you watch a movie you finally understand. Carol returned to the kitchen with a faux sweet smile that always meant a request. She held out a pen and a sheet of paper and said, "This is just a utility extension. Honey, it keeps things simple for 12 months. We will fix it later. Just sign here and enjoy dinner." I looked at the line with my name printed above it, and I felt that careful click inside my chest, the one that turns a person into a boundary. I said no without heat, and the word felt like a key that fit every lock in the room. She tried to laugh, but her voice snagged on the edge. She said, "Do not dramatize the season. It is only paperwork." And I said, "It is your house and your bill." And the way the guests quieted, the way the laughter thinned, told me they had heard something more than manners in my voice. They had heard an ending. My phone buzzed and I saw another email from the bank. The subject line was "Co-signer verification pending." I opened it this time, and the breath went out of me. Not in panic, but in recognition. There was an attached document with my name spelled correctly and a signature that was not mine. A careful imitation of my hand, the loops wrong. The pressure uneven and the timestamp was yesterday afternoon. I felt a cold steadiness run down my arms, clean and bracing. I forwarded the email to Naomi Price with a short note that said, "Please document receipt potential forged authorization attached," and I added it to my folder marked, "Proof." The word looked almost beautiful on the screen, not because I like conflict, but because truth is the only tool that never dulls. I slipped the phone away and stepped back into the room. The scene had not changed. The table still gleamed, the tree still blinked, but the power dynamic had turned like a tide, slow and unstoppable. Carol poured herself more wine. With a hand that trembled just a whisper of shake in the stem, Maddie whispered to a friend, and both looked at me with the same wary curiosity. People reserve for weather they do not understand it, and they cannot control it, and it might ruin their plans. I moved to the sink and washed one plate at a time. The rhythm simple and strong, I thought of the phrase, "free ecosystem" again, and felt a steady refusal rise through me like heat through a vent. I am not their system. I am a person with a name and a ledger, and a life that will no longer be converted into their comfort. I dried my hands, opened the thermostat app once more, and watched the shared invitations expire in a neat, gray line that might as well have been a sentence, and I put the phone away because I did not need the reassurance anymore. I had become it. A guest tried to start a carol and trailed off. Someone asked about the time the electricity flickered last week and whether the grid was acting up. Carol joked that our maid must have bumped a switch in the basement, and a few people smiled too quickly. I let the comment pass because I had already set my answer in motion. The house would speak in a language she understood, not rage, but result. My palms tingled with that strange calm. Again, the one that visited me the night before, when I clicked transfer and felt the future shift, not a loud door slam, just the gentle swing of a hinge that had been waiting years to move. I collected my breath, counted to 3, and lifted the next dish from the rack. The room seemed to lean in, and I knew without theater or speech that the break had happened, not as a dramatic crash, but as a clean split along a hairline crack that had been there for years, and there would be no sealing it with apologies or new paint. The structure had been built on me, and I had stepped away. At 6:05, I closed the bedroom door and let the voices below become a low river that could not touch me. The bedside lamp lit a small circle on the desk. The laptop hummed awake, and the map of my decisions spread out in front of me like a clean sheet, waiting for ink. I did not hesitate. I moved the cursor to the account transfer, entered the amount, read it once for certainty, 120,000 pressed, confirm, watched the screen blink and settle on funded, and felt the quiet weight of safety land in my chest, because the money was now in my own high-yield savings account, with no shared access and no backdoors. I opened the utilities portal, next electricity, gas, water, internet. Each one displayed my name and the autopay status that had been draining me for 2 years. I clicked through them, methodically. Cancel automatic payments, confirm note. The effective date moved to the next. The rhythm felt like steady breathing after a long sprint. The house below kept laughing and clinking, and I kept stripping its invisible cords from my bank. I opened family sharing and revoked every authorized user tied to my profiles. The little circles with their initials dimmed one by one, and the screen became mine again. I changed every password to sequences that only I would remember. I enabled 2-factor authentication. I waited for the codes to arrive, entered them, watched the green check marks appear, and in that simple sequence of clicks, I felt the first solid floor I had stood on in years. I checked the thermostat app and confirmed I was the only owner. Then I opened the city services account and shifted the trash pickup to next week with a single change request that took less than a minute. I pictured the cans heavy and full by nightfall, uncollected and honest, the kind of domestic inconvenience that polite people call unfortunate, and that I would simply call a mirror. I turned to travel next because escape needs a schedule. I searched the rail timetable with calm precision. Chicago Union Station departing at 2:05 in the morning, connection north to Milwaukee before sunrise. I entered my card, selected a window seat, printed the e-ticket to a PDF, and saved it to a folder named December. The confirmation email arrived, and I felt my breath steady into something like joy, but cleaner, a kind of private justice that did not require applause. I opened a new spreadsheet and began to build the ledger I should have made at the beginning, month on one axis, category on another. Electricity winter spike 600 in December 22. Catering deposit 520 in spring. Internet overages. Streaming bundles. Petty cash that was anything but petty. The sum climbed exactly where memory had told me it would, 7,860 over 2 years. I formatted the total in bold, because truth deserves contrast. Then I started an invoice, polite but firm. Itemized lines with dates and amounts due on receipt, with a reasonable grace period. I added a small note that sounded like business and read like boundary reimbursement. Avoids conflict and restores balance. I knew she would hate the tone because it sounded like accountability. I saved the PDF and printed a hard copy on the small printer I kept in the closet. The pages slid out warm and clean, and I set them aside. I pulled the empty white binder from my bag, the one I had labeled in pencil and never filled. I slid a title page under the clear cover, Manual for Running This House, and beneath it, in smaller letters, I typed what no one had ever said. Contents include accounts, due dates, passwords, process flow, and a record of household labor, historically performed by Aaron. I began to fill the sleeves with documentation, screenshots of utilities, dashboards, the canceled autopay confirmations, the proof of transfer to my savings, and the folder of messages where the insults lived. The airdrops captioned, "Made the texts," instructing me to sign because family, the aunts praising obedience. I arranged them chronologically so the story would unfold like a staircase to the truth. Halfway through, I paused to add a flash drive into a plastic pocket. I had loaded it with the same screenshots, the same PDFs, and a short note that read for review. If anyone claims not to remember, I sat back and listened downstairs. The laughter had shifted to a sharper register. Hunger and impatience beginning to edge the voices. The turkey would be late because I had turned the oven low. The wine would be rationed because the card she tried to lean on no longer existed. The internet would stutter because I had changed the password before the guests arrived, and none of that was cruelty. It was transparency, the structure of their comfort finally showing its hidden beams. I returned to the laptop and created a final document, a single page with 3 sentences. Utilities will be transferred into your own names within 48 hours. Reimbursement of $7,860 due. Within 30 days by check or transfer. Future requests to be made respectfully. And in writing, I printed it and placed it at the front of the binder because instructions are merciful when people are used to being carried. I checked the time, 6:20. I packed my backpack with the essentials, the laptop, the charger, a book I loved, the scarf. Aunt Donna had given me last year the e-ticket printed and folded into my wallet. I took a last look around the room and saw the life I had been living, set out in ordinary objects. A lamp, a bed, a mirror that showed a woman I recognized again. I opened my phone and sent a single email to Naomi Price that included the forged signature on the co-signer request. I wrote a calm line that said, "Documenting potential forgery and exposure to debt request, confirmation of receipt." I attached 2 photographs of the fake signature side by side with my genuine one. I sent it and filed the sent message under proof. I added the binder to a plain cardboard box that I labeled kitchen and placed it beside the door, not to help them, but to make sure they never call ignorance a defense. I took the household thermostat off the shared screen and left only the manual controls in the hallway. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle, like new snow. I thought about how revenge had always been sold to us as noise, but the only kind that ever worked for me was the kind that reads like accounting numbers and dates and terms that restore proportion. I did not want them to suffer. I wanted them to feel the weight they had placed on me. I placed the invoice on top of the binder, straightened the stack, slid the USB deeper into its sleeve, and closed the cover with a soft click that sounded like the end of a chapter. I stood, took off the apron that still hung on the doorknob and folded it into my bag, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of a role I would never wear again. When I opened the door, the hallway smelled of rosemary and nerves. I carried the box downstairs and set the binder on the kitchen table, where the light hit it strong. I did not announce anything. I did not ask for attention. I simply left the manual visible, and next to it I placed the note card with my new contact line. Email preferred boundaries maintained. Then I returned to the guest room to wait for midnight to carry me to the train. The phone buzzed once with my ticket reminder. I turned the sound off and smiled at the clean architecture of the evening. The house would answer them, soon the ledger would speak, and my yes was now reserved for a life that belonged to me. At 6:20, the first flicker came like a warning, a brief dimming of light that made everyone glance at the ceiling. Then the bulbs blinked again and went dark. A silence followed that was too sudden to be polite. The hum of the refrigerator stopped, the Christmas playlist died mid-chorus, and the house exhaled into stillness. Carol's laughter cut short. Then the guests began whispering. Someone joked about the power grid. Another reached for their phone, but the Wi-Fi had gone too, the signal gone quiet. The air cooled quickly because the furnace depended on the same circuits. The house that had always been bright and loud was now reduced to breath and candle smoke. I stood by the stairwell watching them move like ghosts around the dining table, the silver reflecting the glow of half-burned votives. Carol called out my name sharply, her voice carrying through the dim kitchen. "Aaron, check the breaker. Will you? You always know how to fix it." But I didn't move. I only leaned against the doorframe and listened to the way panic begins soft before it spreads. Maddie tried the thermostat, then her phone, then muttered something about passwords not working. Carol's tone sharpened. "Aaron, the oven stopped the turkeys still raw, do something." And I answered evenly, "I can't. I don't have control anymore." The words landed like cold glass on tile. The guests turned, confusion surfacing first, then realization. Carol blinked, not understanding. "What do you mean you don't have control?" she said, still in her hostess smile. "I mean, everything that ran on my name doesn't belong to me. Now," I said, "so you'll need to call the companies yourself." The silence thickened. Mr. Patel, sitting near the hallway, lowered his napkin, slowly his eyes tracing the candlelight. Maddie's friend tried to laugh but stopped when the oven beeped an error tone, and the smell of half-cooked poultry filled the air. Carol's cheeks flushed deep. She reached for her phone and began dialing, muttering about customer service lines, about how this was ridiculous, about how Aaron must have done something wrong. But her voice shook more with each attempt. The guests began putting on their coats because the heat had already dropped. A few offered polite excuses, murmuring about early drives and weather, but some stayed too curious to leave before the drama finished. I walked quietly to the counter and poured myself a small glass of water, each motion deliberate, not out of malice, but clarity. And I said, "You might want to call the power company before it gets colder." Carol snapped, "Stop being dramatic, fix it," and I shook my head gently. "There's nothing to fix, Mom, it's just yours now." The sentence froze her mid-breath. Maddie's phone buzzed with a declined transaction alert, her expression twisting. "Why is the card not working?" she whispered. Carol looked over, realizing the same thing. She reached for her purse and tried her own card. The portable POS from the catering app blinked, red payment declined. I watched her try again, slower, as if tone could change numbers. Then she sighed and began rummaging through her bag for cash, pulling small bills, coins, the remnants of her always organized image, finally turning to the guests with a brittle laugh. "Holiday chaos," she said. "It's nothing, we'll just order takeout." I said softly, "There's a place nearby, they still deliver. I used to get their combos when money was tight. Remember?" Maddie said it tasted cheap. The irony moved through the room like wind. Carol ignored me and called the restaurant voice, brittle sweet, ordering the largest holiday platter available, extra fees. She gave her card number and waited, then frowned. "They're saying it's declined," she murmured. Pressing redial, repeating the order with forced calm. "Try another card. The limit is fine." Then the operator said something that made her expression falter. "They'll need cash or immediate transfer." She turned toward me with that practiced smile. "Aaron, lend me your card for 5 minutes. I'll sort it out after dinner." And I answered without anger, "I don't have any shared cards left." She blinked again, uncomprehending the kind of confusion that looks like shock, but is really exposure. Mr. Patel cleared his throat from his seat, his voice calm but cutting through the dark like a beam. "Forgive me, Carol, but am I hearing right? Aaron used to handle all the utilities and bills for this house." The sentence was not cruel, just factual, but it landed harder than shouting. The room froze. The guests who had laughed earlier now sat back quietly, some glancing down, others watching Carol's face for direction. She stammered, "Well, she helps sometimes. It's family we all share," but even Maddie looked away. Mr. Patel nodded slowly, the kind of acknowledgement that carries weight, and said, "She helped a lot then." No one answered. I set my empty glass on the counter, the sound sharp in the silence. The house creaked as the temperature dropped another degree. Candlelight fluttered on the walls, revealing what years of pretending had hidden. Carol broke the stillness by clapping her hands and saying too brightly, "Well, let's keep spirits high, we'll light more candles. This is just a hiccup." She handed Maddie a lighter, but her hand shook enough that the flame went out twice. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Then I thought of the years of small humiliations, the quiet theft of time and money, the way she laughed earlier and said I was the maid. I felt the balance shift, not revenge, but restoration. Maddie whispered to her mother, "I can Venmo Mr. Patel maybe," and Carol hissed, "No, we'll handle it." The guests began pulling out their phones, offering suggestions. Someone joked softly about the irony of a house this size without heat on Christmas Eve. Carol's lips tightened her eyes, finding mine like a silent accusation. I didn't move. I didn't explain. I just looked back evenly, letting her see the calm that comes when you finally stop apologizing. The doorbell rang an hour later. The restaurant delivery man standing there with steam rising from plastic containers. Carol fumbled through her wallet, counting small bills, her friends adding a few notes to cover the total. The man gave her the receipt and left. The smell of takeout filled the house, the same meal Maddie once called too common. I sat at the corner of the table and said nothing. The sound of chopsticks tapping against plastic lids, replacing the missing music. No one mentioned the turkey. When the last bite was eaten, the silence grew so thick it might as well have been snow. The candles had burned low, wax spilling over crystal holders. The guests started leaving in small waves, each farewell polite but hurried. Carol stood by the door, smiling too wide, thanking them, saying next year will be better. When the last car left, she turned to me and whispered hoarsely, "You've humiliated me." I looked at her and said, "No, Mom, you did that yourself." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The lights flickered briefly as if the house itself had agreed. Upstairs, I packed the last of my things and checked my phone. The train schedule, glowing, steady departure, confirmed. Downstairs, the house remained silent except for the wind pressing against the windows, and I knew the structure had learned the sound of consequence. The house had finally spoken. Morning in Milwaukee came pale and quiet lake air cold against the windows of the small Airbnb. I made coffee in a chipped mug and stood barefoot on the wood floor while the city moved softly outside. I had slept with my bag packed and the train ticket on the nightstand like a promise. My phone lit up with a video call before 8, Carol's name pulsing across the screen. I let it ring twice, then answered. Her face appeared in harsh kitchen, light. Hair, unbrushed eyes, swollen behind her. The house looked gray with cold. I heard a loud metallic knocking through the speaker and knew the pipes were complaining. Her voice came ragged. "The house is freezing and the water sounds wrong. What did you do?" And I said without heat that I did nothing to the weather or the pipes. I only stopped paying for what is not mine. She tried to smile like a diplomat said, "This is not the time for lessons. Christmas is ruined. Your aunt is angry, your sister is embarrassed, the neighbors will talk." I watched steam rise from my cup and waited. Then I said, "We can be practical. if you want heat and water and internet. Today there is a process, and it begins with you standing in your own name." She flinched at the phrase like it was an insult. I explained it slowly. Go to the utility websites with your laptop, set up new accounts, using your legal name and social security number. Provide a debit card that belongs to you. Request immediate service transfer. Call the emergency line for the gas because of the pipe noise. And state, there are no medical devices in the home. Give them your number, not mine. She blinked and said, "You can just do it faster, you know the passwords." And I answered, "I do not hold them anymore. I changed them when I revoked access. You are going to be fine. You are an adult." She bit her lip and whispered, "Do not make me beg." And I said, "You do not need to beg. You need to take responsibility." The line went quiet, and I could see her thinking about humiliation more than about heat. The kitchen behind her was full of candles burned down to stubs and plates from last night still stacked. Maddie stepped into the frame wrapped in a blanket and snapped, "Why are you being cruel?" And I felt no thrill, only a careful steadiness. I said, "Here are my terms," and I listed them clearly while I watched the snow begin again beyond my window. Reimbursement of $7,860 within 30 days by transfer or certified check. A written apology for the language maid and help addressed to me and copied to Aunt Donna and Mr. Patel. Because truth belongs in daylight, all utilities placed in your names within 48 hours with proof of confirmation numbers, removal of every cosign and authorized user connection tied to my identity, including cards subscriptions and any online wallet. All future requests made by email during business hours because you will not call me at midnight and pretend it is family emergency when it is convenience. She swallowed and said, "Do not make me look small. Do not make your mother look cheap." And I said gently, "Dignity over money is something you taught me when I was 12 and wanted brand shoes. So which lesson do you want me to follow now?" She stared at me like I had spoken a language she had forgotten. She once knew. Maddie rolled her eyes and muttered, "You love control." And I said, "I love boundaries and I love receipts." And then because small order creates large calm, I opened my phone and unshared every domestic calendar I had once set for them. The monthly reminders to change the furnace filter, the notes about trash day, the little alarms for cleaning the dishwasher screen and checking smoke detectors. A few taps and the lists vanished from their devices. A quiet deletion that would not hurt them but would reveal what I had been carrying in the video. I watched Maddie pick up her phone and frown. "The shared lists are gone." She said, "The house will not run itself," I replied. Carol pressed her lips together and tried to pivot. She asked, "What if we pay half now and half later?" And I said, "You can make partial payments on a schedule, but you will put it in writing, and you will not pretend later that you forgot." She nodded too fast, then winced as another pipe clanged. She said, "The water sounds dangerous," and I said, "Call the gas company." Now she turned away, shouting for Peter to find a flashlight. I waited, sipping coffee, then my screen flashed with an email banner from Naomi Price. I opened it while they clattered in the kitchen. The message was clean and spare confirmation of forged signature attempt on the bank file attached. Metadata logged recommendation. Do not sign any documents and consider alerting institution fraud department. My breath did not quicken. It only deepened. I forwarded the note to a new thread addressed to Carol and Peter and wrote for your awareness. A forged attempt exists. Any further use of my identity will be escalated through formal channels. Then I attached 2 images, the fake signature and my real one, and hit send on the video. I watched Carol's phone buzz. She read the email and her face changed in increments. First confusion, then denial, then the slow burn of fear. She looked up and started to scold me and stopped, because there it was in writing from someone who knows the law better than she knows performance. She whispered, "This will make us look awful." And I said, "It will make the truth visible. You can choose what you do next." Maddie tried to reclaim the scene by saying, "Can we talk about this later? And come get the space heater from your place." And I said, "I am not home. I am in Milwaukee. You will be fine. You will rent a heater from the hardware store, and you will use your own card." Carol's shoulders sagged and then stiffened. She asked, "What if the companies do not switch today?" And I said, "Then you will use blankets and tea and patience. And by tonight you will understand what I have done for the last 3 years." There was no bitterness in it, just a simple accounting. She nodded slowly and said, "We will do it." "We will call." Then she added too quickly, "But do not tell anyone about the apology. It is private," and I shook my head. "Public harm requires public repair. Your friends and our neighbor heard you call me the maid." She closed her eyes, opened them again, and said, "Fine. Write what you want me to sign." I said, "You will write it yourself, because truth, written in your own hand, is a better teacher." The screen went quiet. The house behind her sounded like a museum. I said, "I will email a template for the reimbursement and the transfer of accounts with fields for confirmation numbers. You will reply with documentation." She nodded, looked younger for a second, and then did what she always does when cornered. She asked for a shortcut. "Can you please just come back and help?" I said no and felt the word hold steady like a pillar. "You can do this." The call ended with no ceremony. I set the phone on the table and listened to the radiator in the Airbnb knock a little, then settle. I stood by the window and watched the street, a couple walking a dog, a kid in a red hat dragging a sled across slush ordinary life making room for itself, around people who choose to grow up. Another email arrived from the bank confirming my fraud alert had been filed. I archived it with the rest under the folder named Proof. Then I opened a fresh document and wrote a simple message that I would send later to Aunt Donna and Mr. Patel, a note of thanks for witnessing and for not looking away. I closed the laptop and let my breath find a new rhythm. There was nothing left to manage, only the work of keeping my promise to myself. Milwaukee light warmed a little against the floorboards, and I thought about how boundaries are a form of care for everyone, even those who fight them. If boundaries are love in disguise, say, boundaries. Then I smiled because I finally believed my own line. Toxic family can change, or they can watch you change family. Betrayal can end where conflict justice begins, and in this quiet kitchen, with coffee and cold air and a train ticket waiting revenge story, money looked less like fury and more like a well-kept ledger written in my own hand. The community center smelled faintly of cinnamon and folding chairs, the kind of scent that belonged to small-town gatherings where everyone pretended not to gossip. I arrived just before 7, carrying a plain tote and wearing the same gray coat I had traveled in. Aunt Donna waved from across the room, her face warm but cautious, as if she knew this evening might stretch the meaning of family. Further than comfort allowed the post-Christmas dinner had been rescheduled after the blackout fiasco, and half the neighborhood had shown up out of curiosity. Carol stood near the buffet table, trying too hard to look cheerful. Maddie beside her, scrolling her phone. Peter, talking quietly to Mr. Patel. I walked to the long table near the stage and set the binder down with slow precision. The label on its spine read, "Receipts. Bills, dates, total $7,860. Beside it, I placed a small USB in a clear case. No theatrics, just evidence. Aunt Donna gave me a small nod. Carol froze mid-sentence and said too loudly, "What is this supposed to be?" I said, "Documentation for clarity," then turned to Mr. Patel and asked if he remembered hearing me called the help. He looked uncomfortable but honest. He said yes. It was on Christmas Eve in front of everyone you were told you were just the maid. Carol gasped and said, "Oh, please, it was a joke." But the murmurs around her grew heavier, the kind of murmurs that strip a room of denial. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply opened the binder and turned it toward the group so they could see the organized pages, every bill labeled, every transaction cross-referenced with date and category. The neat column at the end marked, "Paid by Aaron." Unpaid by others, I said, "This is how the house ran. These are the accounts, the reminders, the passwords, the subscriptions, and from now on you will be the ones to call and renew and budget." Not me. The pages didn't need dramatics. They spoke in numbers and order. The same language that once made me invisible now became my proof. Carol tried to laugh again, a brittle sound. She said, "You didn't have to make a scene," and I said, "I'm not making a scene. I'm explaining process. It's what I did for years. Only this time, you are the audience." I could see Maddie's hands tighten around her phone. She said, "You love being the victim." And I answered softly, "No. I loved keeping the lights on. I loved feeding a system that refused to see the work behind comfort. Now I love being done." Aunt Donna touched my arm, whispering, "You're doing fine." Her support quiet but steady, I reached into the binder and took out a single sheet. It was the payment schedule. I had made it fair monthly installments over 4 months with a mild late fee that wasn't cruel, just real. I handed a copy to Carol, who stared at it as if it were written in another language. Peter looked at it too and sighed. The kind of sigh men use when they finally realize convenience had a cost. I spoke plainly: when the payments are complete, the matter ends, you will have learned how to handle what you thought handled itself. Carol's cheeks flushed deep pink. Someone from her bridge group asked lightly, "Isn't this a bit formal?" And Carol shot her a glare. I turned to Maddie next and handed her a slim notebook. The cover said, "Weekly Task Checklist." Her name printed neatly at the top. She frowned. "What's this supposed to be?" I said. "It's the household routine you'll need: vacuum schedule, grocery rotation, bill reminders." She blinked as if I'd handed her a foreign object. I smiled kindly. "Consider it practice, you're welcome." The room chuckled softly, not mocking, just stunned by civility turned weapon. Carol tried to gather control again, saying, "There's no need for all this paperwork. We're family," and I said, "That's exactly why it's necessary, because family should not depend on silence to function." Mr. Patel cleared his throat again and said, "I think Erin's right. Everyone in the block thought she still lived there because every call for maintenance came through." Her Carol glared but said nothing. I continued, "The USB contains screenshots and messages you sent me over the years. It's not for humiliation, it's for record keeping, so there's no confusion later about who said what." Maddie scoffed and said, "You're unbelievable." I replied, "No, just thorough." Carol exhaled sharply, muttered, "Enough of this. Let's eat." But no one moved toward the food. The air in the hall had turned heavier. Someone's child coughed softly. The Christmas lights above us blinked unevenly. Aunt Donna reached into her purse and pulled out her reading glasses. She looked at the top page and read aloud the line I had written under the total. It was never effortless. It was Erin. She looked at me, then at Carol, her voice low but clear. "Did you write this?" And Carol said no. Erin did. Aunt Donna nodded. "That's the truth." Then Carol looked trapped, eyes darting to each guest as if searching for an exit. Then one of her cousins asked bluntly, "Have you apologized?" Carol stammered it was just words, but the cousin said words matter. When they break someone who built your comfort. Carol's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the binder again, the receipts gleaming under fluorescent light, her hands trembling slightly. Finally, she pulled a napkin toward her, borrowed a pen from Mr. Patel, and began to write the room. Quieted until the only sounds were her pen scratching and the muffled hum of a heater, she wrote slowly, "I'm sorry for the things I said I was wrong to call you. The help I understand, now that everything we took for granted was effort. It was never effortless, it was you." She stopped, folded the paper, and slid it across the table toward me. I didn't pick it up, I only nodded, once said thank you. Not for the words, but for the acknowledgement. She asked, "Will you forgive me?" And I said, "Forgiveness is a process. Like billing, it happens in cycles." "Not instantly," Maddie muttered under her breath. "You're enjoying this." I looked at her calmly and said, "I'm learning from it." She turned away. Aunt Donna stood then, her voice firm. "It's time we eat, and maybe we start fresh." She walked to the buffet table and served herself. The others followed, hesitant but relieved. The tension softened just enough for chatter to resume. Mr. Patel stopped beside me and said quietly, "I'm glad you spoke the truth. Needed witnesses. I said thank you for listening." He nodded once and went to join the others. Carol remained seated, staring at the binder as if it were a mirror showing her a version of herself she hadn't planned to meet. I left it on the table for her to keep. I didn't need it anymore. I had already memorized every line. The ledger was not about money anymore. It was about weight redistribution. I walked to the window and watched the snow outside the world still cold but fair. Aunt Donna waved me over to eat. I joined her, the food simple and warm. Carol eventually approached, holding the folded napkin apology and whispering, "Thank you again." I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because silence was the truest form of closure I knew. If truth is enough, type truth and closure. I thought not aloud, but inside. And as the evening wound down and laughter began to return to the room, I realized that justice didn't need punishment. It only needed exposure. Revenge. Inheritance drama. Family had turned into story, financial reality, conflict. Justice resolved itself under fluorescent light and quiet witnesses. And that was enough. By December 27th, the air in Milwaukee had shifted from cutting to clean sunlight, bounced off the snowbanks outside my small studio apartment, the first place in years where every switch and bill carried only my name. I spent the morning answering a brief email from Naomi confirming that Carol had signed the repayment agreement. The first transfer of $2,500 already posted the remaining balance scheduled for 3 monthly installments, all properly dated and notarized, a quiet miracle written in decimals. And time later that afternoon, Peter called once not to plead, but to ask for the contact numbers of the utility companies, his voice calm, unsure the kind of tone men use when they finally see how many invisible tasks kept their lives upright. I texted him the list with short instructions. He thanked me, simply saying he had managed to get the power reconnected under his own name. I replied, "That was good progress." And he said almost proudly that he had also set up the gas and internet, then joked that the hold music taught him patience. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. It was a new kind of conversation, one where respect didn't need apology to exist. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill. The wax pooling slow, I thought of the binder still sitting on the community center table, of Aunt Donna's steady nod, and Mr. Patel's calm witness of Carol's trembling hand. When she wrote those words, it was never effortless. It was errand. 3 days later, a payment alert arrived again, small but steady. The ledger shrinking like a healed wound, justice measured not in headlines, but in reliability. In early January, I took a walk downtown, bought white tulips from a corner florist because they looked like small, clean beginnings. I set them in a glass jar beside the candle. The air smelled of vanilla and cold air, not of obligation. I opened my laptop and moved $60,000 from the high-yield savings into a 6-month certificate of deposit. The rest stayed where it could breathe numbers living quietly under my control. I smiled at the thought that peace could look like a balance sheet that matched my boundaries. Maddie texted about a week later asking if I had the catering company's contact because she was planning her son's birthday. I sent it politely but didn't add reminders. 2 days later, Aunt Donna told me the party had turned into chaos. The delivery arrived 2 hours late. The cake melted, half the guests left before it started. Maddie had cried and blamed the driver, until Peter reminded her that managing timing was part of responsibility. Donna said she had simply replied that it was a good first lesson. I didn't laugh, but the thought sat warm in my chest, consequences working like quiet teachers. That evening, I opened my email again and cleared old notifications, removing everyone still labeled family from my shared Prime account. The simple click of remove felt cleaner than confrontation. Then I composed a new message addressed to the family thread subject. Line, courtesy resources, body text, short and professional. Hello all as you're adjusting to independent management. Here's a link explaining how to set up personal bill payments. It's a useful guide. Best Aaron, no sarcasm, no bitterness, just closure disguised as politeness. Within minutes, Maddie replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Carol replied later with a formal thank you, and I imagined her reading the article twice before forwarding it to Peter. I didn't need to witness that part. The small studio grew cozier as the weeks passed, the radiator humming like a heartbeat. I started keeping a notebook of expenses and plans for spring, maybe a small trip, maybe a new course in accounting systems, something that belonged entirely to my own name. On a quiet Saturday morning, I sat by the window again, watching the lake thaw at its edges, and thought of how easy it was to mistake service for love and silence for peace. The truth was both required choice, and I had finally chosen myself. On the second week of January, an unexpected message appeared from Maddie, just 3 words. I am sorry I stared at it for a long minute, the kind of stillness where forgiveness considers knocking. Then I set the phone down, let 72 hours pass, and replied with the cleanest line I could write, "Boundaries, stay." She didn't answer, but the read receipt blinked once enough to mark that something had been understood, even if not yet learned. That night, I cooked for myself something simple, soup and bread, no performance, no audience. Only the quiet rhythm of small, deliberate acts. The candle burned lower, and the tulips began to open wider, the petals translucent against the window light. I whispered softly, not to anyone, but to the room, that revenge had never been about destruction. It had been about correction, about turning the power back to its rightful switch. Outside, the city lights flickered like slow stars, and I thought of how people believe revenge is loud, full of shouting and slammed doors, but mine had been a transfer confirmation, a calendar unshared, a house learning the sound of its own silence. Mine was a light switch. One click, and the whole pattern of control reversed direction. I blew out the candle, the room dimmed to amber. The tulips leaned slightly toward the last trace of heat, and I realized this was what quiet justice looked like. Not triumph, not loss, just the symmetry of effort finally matched by respect. And in that stillness, I knew I didn't need to win anymore, because dignity had already settled its balance. If you believe in quiet justice and silent revenge, where dignity over money wins, comment, "Justice without hate," subscribe. If you stand for emotional resilience, truth, and closure, standing up for yourself, reclaiming respect and revenge through truth,